Hello again, everyone. Andy Garcia here, looking at the markets, and I'm looking at the major currencies, talking about the dollar index futures and the majors that we follow here. You got the dollar index on the left on the 4-hour chart, and I'm looking at last week's activity followed by this week's activity. I've already highlighted the zone here. As you can see, it's a gray box that I've already highlighted. You have last week's trading range, and then again you have this week's trading range. As you can see here, this is last week's trading range, and then of course you have this week's trading range. Now the important thing here is to pay attention to how the market treated these levels in terms of the previous high and the previous low. You got last week's high and last week's low here. You know, this is last week's high and this is last week's low. Now the reason I watch this is primarily because I like to put my let the market tell me what kind of context is in. As you can see here, the dollar index futures going sideways. Primarily it did not make its way up to the 80.97 area, which is showing a little sign of weakness here. As you can see, 80.60 was the high for this week, and then basically traded lower throughout the week. And the curiosity here is, even though it was down for the most part throughout this week, it really went sideways when you compare last week's trading range to this week's trading range. We really did not make any new ground to the upside, and we did not make any new ground to the downside. In a sense, really what we did was we retraced all of this big move from last week. Okay, you see this big selling tail here that came in on Thursday and Friday of last week, and then basically the bears were able to push the market lower, finding support at last week's low. Here's this big nasty push down, try to push down below last week's low on key news, and then bounced up, and as you can see, finished on the week basically towards the lows of last week, but using, notice here that we used last week's low as support on Friday. As you can see, using that as support of a buying opportunity. Buyers came in last week at this 79.56 level, and sure enough, they came in as buyers again this week as well. Now, to put that into context, as you can see here, you got last week's high in the euro, last week's low, and basically in the beginning of the week we tested last week's low, and the market held. You can see that the buyers are willing to pay for the euro down here in the low 129s, and that showed a little bit of lack of selling, or should we say brought in some short covering, because the people that were short here basically realized that there were no sellers. So in a sense, retracing all of last week's trading range, you can see big nasty push from 131.25 down to 28.76, and the market basically retraced that whole entire move, which suggests that this move to the downside from last week was really invalid. But important here is that we broke out of last week's trading range, closing the highs, and in fact pushing above 131.61 in a key level in the mid. I think it's this 121.24 is a big number here. I had to go back and check my charts, but we had a substantial breakout there. And now the question here is, going into next week, whether or not the euro is going to finish strongly, pushing us above 132 and then perhaps even onto 134. We'll be on alert there. As you can see, to tie in the knot, you got the pound here traded, consolidated a little bit, retracing last week's trading range, and then ultimately breaking out of last week's high, retracing, re-breaking out again, 61.40 before closing at 161.69. As you can see here, the Australian dollar also breaking out of last week's high, coming back down, using it as support. This is a fantastic setup. As you can see here, you have your breakout, and then you have your retest right here, and then you continued on. Got 105.20 was a nice setup there. As you can see, it reached up here as high as 105.70 or so. So that's a pretty decent setup there. Nice, but again, 1, 2, and 3, these three markets closing above last week's high, which is really important. At the same time, you got the Japanese yen above last week's high. 82.82 was the breakout point here, finishing or pushing as high as 83.95, 84 level. A little bit of a resistance up there, closing right around 83.49, but it did close above last week's high. So you have 4 markets closing above last week's high, while the dollar index is pretty much closing inside of last week's trading range. But to add to the dollar index weakness, we did have the Swiss franc here basically drop down below 92.50, which was last week's low, pushing down, closing at 91.76. Now the question here is whether or not we're going to continue to push lower in the Swiss franc. While at the same time, we got the Canadian dollar broke out pretty early in the week, showed to be a pretty nice setup here, 98.75, pushing all the way down to 98.20 before bouncing and settling right around 98.54. Again, we have, let's just call this a negative one because these went below last week's low. So in a sense here, you can see that if you're watching the markets this week, there were in fact 6 setups that you could have taken here, all to the long side. You had a breakout here in the euro, you had the breakout in the pound and the Australian dollar to the upside. These are all long plays. And then the Japanese yen along. At the same time, you had the Canadian and the Swiss franc breaking down to the downside. So those set up to, those proved to be pretty decent setups throughout this week. Now the question here going into next week is whether or not the dollar index is going to be able to break down below last week's low, which would suggest more euro, pound, and Australian dollar weak strength. At the same time, that would encourage us to look for more weakness in the Swiss and the Canadian. On the other side, if you have the dollar index breaking above 81 again, then you'll have to apply what we just said to the opposite direction. But in a sense, you can see that the dollar index is going sideways right now. So again, holiday trading is in effect. Got to be careful with our trades, and there's nothing wrong with taking it light here for the meantime. That's pretty much what I've been doing, just waiting for the holiday season to come to an end. And this is a much better time to be spending with your friends and family to begin with. So I'm going to take it from that angle and wish you all happy holidays, of course. Christmas is right around the corner for us, but as you can see, we also have New Year's and whatnot. So just be on alert here. The markets are moving, and it looks like they're doing it covertly. So, and again, this is Andy Garcia signing off. Hopefully this helps. Stay safe in your trading. Best regards to all. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you at the next market wrap. While I got you here, I wanted to take a quick moment to say that if you really liked what you're looking at here in the free Forex market wrap video, I wanted to give you the opportunity to come take a look at the premium weekly Forex market wrap video that I do every week. And basically it's a little bit more in depth, or should I say a lot more in depth information about the markets that I cover. And you can see here that in this short video I go over the basics about what I've been looking at on the major currencies. In the more in-depth market wrap video, I take a look at a in-depth analysis on the 6 major currency pairs. You also get actionable trading scenarios. The important thing here is that we're offering a 3-day risk-free trial, so you don't have to pay a cent. It's about a 30 to 45 minute video that'll go through all the major currency pairs that I look at, and it shows you a lot more in-depth analysis and forecast, looking at the longer term picture and the big major trends that are affecting what you're looking at on the lower time frames that you're looking at on a day-to-day basis. So take a moment to go take a look at the premium market wrap video. You can see the link here provided, www.traderstouch.com/3day, and it also includes a free membership to the Traders Learning Network, where you can meet other traders that are like-minded individuals, and they're basically there to help everybody looking at the same markets as you. So good luck, hope it helps, and look forward to seeing you on the inside.